Right, welcome everyone to our weekly call. Hope you all had a positive start to your week. As you may have seen, we've got two main topics for the call this week. Firstly, I'll just switch on my light, so it's a bit dark in my study. Firstly, Owen and Udbhav are going to talk about the TRR consultation that Mozilla Corp is running at the moment, which runs through, I think, till 4th of January. As you may have seen from the call details, this is going to be a sort of policy-focused discussion. So if you have any deep technical questions, maybe direct those sort of separately offline to the Mozilla team, but I'm sure Owen and Udbhav will give us a good insight into the consultation itself from a policy point of view. And then Sara Dickinson is going to talk about sort of DNS privacy, in particular a new client that has been developed, and then touch on RFC 8932 even, which gives some good advice on sort of best current practice for resolver operators when it comes to privacy matters. And then if time permits, we'll pick up on any other business that anyone wishes to raise. So without further ado, if I can introduce Owen and Udbhav, if you want to unmute. If you've got any slides, you can certainly share your screen. Otherwise, if you just want to just talk and then take any questions, that's completely fine as well.
Super, thank you, Andrew. We don't actually have any slides. We'll try to keep it as informal and as collegial as possible. So firstly, to introduce myself, my name is Owen Bennett. I'm a policy manager with Mozilla Corporation. I'm based in Brussels in Belgium. I've been with Mozilla for about 3 years now, working on a variety of public policy issues. We're a relatively small public policy team, so we tend to have to cover a lot of different domains, but my general focus has been around platform regulation and online content control. And so I've been working on some of the policy aspects of DOE, particularly as it relates to issues in Europe, for about a year or so now as well. And I'll let Udbhav introduce himself. Udbhav.
Thanks, Owen. Hi, everyone. I'm Udbhav Tiwari, and I'm a public policy advisor for Mozilla based out of New Delhi in India. I've been with Mozilla for a little more than a year now and deal with issues around content regulation, data protection, and connectivity. Pleasure to be here, and back to Owen.
Great, thank you. So, as Andrew mentioned, as we mentioned ourselves, we're policy folks. We are not per se technical folks, although we do tend to have opinions on some of these matters. So what we will do today is quickly walk you through the comment period, the motivation for it, and what we hope to achieve with it. And then obviously, if you have any questions about that, we can obviously happily take those questions here, or we can follow up by email. So to get straight into the details of this, and thank you, Andrew, for sharing the link in the chat. Basically, as many in this group will be aware, Mozilla has been very much involved in DOE from the outset. So we were heavily involved in the standardization process at the IETF. And for the last number of years, we've been working to try and bring this technology to our products, most notably the Firefox web browser. And we passed a critical milestone in that endeavor in February of this year, when we completed our US rollout of DOE by default. So at the moment, you can enable DOE in Firefox anywhere in the world. And the US is the only jurisdiction where it is now the default on option for our user base. So that rollout was completed in February of this year. It took about a year to do so because there was quite a few kind of technical and operational hurdles to overcome, but that has now been completed, and we're now in the process of monitoring that and just running the analytics and just making sure that everything is proceeding smoothly. And as many will be aware, our implementation of this goes beyond just encrypting the DNS. We also have what's known as our Trusted Recursive Resolver program, where the resolvers that we're using for DOE are specific ones which we have negotiated agreements with on the basis of their privacy and security properties. Now, when we have approached DOE, what we have tried to do, and this is like, given the kind of history of Mozilla, what we always try to do is to work collaboratively and in the open. And so we've tried to kind of document our progress with DOE over the past 3 years as things have progressed. But one thing that it's obvious when it comes to the DNS is the DNS is a pretty critical piece of the internet architecture, and it's one which many folks depend on in many different contexts. And it's also an aspect of the internet ecosystem, the technical aspect, which actually a lot of people from non-technical backgrounds do depend on for various aspects and for various issues, many of whom might not necessarily be involved in the general standard setting process and inputting in that domain. So as part of our effort to make sure that we're proceeding with DOE as thoughtfully and as in a way which is kind of crowdsourcing good ideas and good recommendations, we decided to open a comment period. And the purpose of this comment period was really to kind of crowdsource ideas, recommendations, and insights to help us with our future development and our future rollout of DOE in Firefox. Because ultimately we have rolled out in the US. Our plan is to bring DOE and to bring our TRR program to more jurisdictions. And we view the comment period as a pretty important and pretty helpful aspect of that evolving thinking. And so when you see, if you've had a chance to look at the comment period document, what we're doing effectively is we are asking a series of, we're in the first form, we're looking for any and every kind of feedback both from the technical community on, for instance, various aspects of our work on DOE, but also from folks who might not necessarily be so tied up in the technical aspects or have a specific interest. So we're looking at NGOs, we're looking at academics, we're looking at child protection groups, and basically as broad a variety of stakeholders who really do care about the internet and its future development. And so we're welcoming any feedback, but we've also published a list of like specific guiding questions where we think we are particularly interested in having an answer to this, or we think answers to this question might help us as we bring DOE to new jurisdictions and regions. We've already had some decent input, and we're hoping to get more input as the next few weeks go along. And a big part of Udbhav and my work as of late has just been interacting with stakeholders, making sure this is on their agenda, whether they're in government, whether they're in the NGO community, whether they're in industry, and just making sure that we do get a diverse and rich set of feedback. The comment period, it opened in mid-November and it runs until the 4th of January. And thereafter, we have committed to publishing all the feedback we receive. The only caveats being that we will not be publishing feedback for which the submitter has opted out or has told us they would not like this to be publicized. And we will also not be publishing comments which violate our community participation guidelines, i.e. they contain kind of problematic or harmful speech or so forth. That has not happened so far. The comments we've received have all been kind of in well-intended and in good nature. And thereafter, once we've published all the feedback, we will take a chance to reflect on it, and it will feed into our broader work about thinking about the next steps of DOE. DOE is not going to be something, our future work is not something which happens on the whim. And as we look to new regions to bring this to and new partners to bring on board, we hope that the feedback we receive from the comment period will be a helpful kind of enriching contribution to that work. And those are the kind of the main points I think that's worthy of raising. Udbhav, is there anything that you think is important that has to be mentioned? Okay. So I think I'll pause there because that's already quite a lot. Obviously, all of this is repeated in the comment period documentation, but I'm happy to pause and take any questions on that if folks have anything.
Fantastic, thanks, Owen. Well, if people do have questions, you can either raise your virtual hand or post them in the chat if you're not able to speak wherever you are, and we'll happily go through those. And maybe what people are thinking, Owen, obviously I saw in the notes that he said that if people didn't want their input published, that you'd respect that. Have you thought about maybe publishing a summary of the inputs that you get, even if you can't publish some of the individual stuff, just to give a sense of the breadth of views that you gather on the various questions?
Yeah, no, we'll be doing something like that. So we'll because we've blogged quite a bit about Doe and our technical work. And I think one thing that we're learning from the comment period process is that we need to do a bit more of that, and that there's specific themes that are popping up in the process, I think, which we'll probably want to speak to. So I think that we will, we want this to be as useful, and we want the kind of the transparency to actually be meaningful. So I think what Udbhav and myself and some of our internal product folks will be thinking a lot in January and February about how to make sure that feedback is like what we learn, how we can kind of share with the world. So that's definitely something which is it's in our mind.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I do have a question. Are you open to changing some of your fundamental assumptions going into this comment period? So you've made some statements along the lines of, we don't see DNS as an effective way to deliver content control services, for instance, or blocking by default of things outside of what's required by law. I have a number of customers worldwide in the service provider space that do block things by default for their subscribers outside of what's legally obligated, because you've mentioned that you're using Google's data in order to do this at the browser level, but that's a protection in an application in a single part of user space, whereas DNS is a protection that provides or can protect things against the entirety of user space, not on a per application basis. So I'm kind of curious if you're open to, readdressing that philosophy, as a part of these comments.
Thanks for the question. I don't imagine any situation where we will reevaluate the basic presumptions which have guided our work so far, which are at the core of why we're doing those, because we see it as a pretty essential way of enhancing the security and the privacy of our users around the world. And that's not going to change that fundamental principle. Obviously, there's ways, particularly with respect to our TRR policies, which we can look at the contours of how those values are implemented in the product. But at this point, I can't say what those specific changes, if any, they would be. But I think in general, like our position remains that we don't think content blocking through the DNS is a good approach for content control in general. And that basic assumption won't be changing.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I saw John Todd's hand raised. Oh, see now it's...
Yeah, so I guess it's more of a general question on what parts of policy are covered in the TRR request or the comment period. Notably absent from the document, but potentially useful, and let me ask if this is something you're looking for, would be questions about how how DOE would be actually implemented by Mozilla. So a lot of the questions on the comment document seem to apply to TRR operators, and I'm not looking for an answer to this, but something along the lines of, are there any exceptions that Mozilla is willing to make at a national level for DOE implementation, and what is the policy surrounding that? Is that something that is appropriate for inclusion in a comment on the TRR document, or is that a separate path that needs to be taken?
And could you clarify what you mean by exemptions in this context?
If a nation requests from Mozilla, so exemption from DOE as an example, like Albania says that they don't want to have DOE applied to. Someone's not muted there.
Sí. Pisaba calle.
Suibio, you're not muted.
Yes, no.
There we go. Perfect. So exempting at a national level from DOE. So it's Albonia requests from Mozilla that they do not have any of their citizens using DOE. That is a transaction. It's a policy transaction between a nation and Mozilla. It doesn't have anything to do with the TRR. It is really exclusively a Mozilla policy question. So I'm not sure if it falls into the envelope that you've described for this document or not, and I'm wondering if that's included.
Udbhav, I'd be curious to have your thoughts on this, but obviously we, as I said at the beginning, we're looking for general feedback, and then we have some specific kind of guiding questions that we've kind of tried to put into the documentation. Obviously, our main focus here is our TRR policies, because that is the area where, from a policy point of view, is most interesting as we consider new regions. But obviously, I don't want to rule out or to dissuade any particular types of comments, because at this point, we think our hope is to crowdsource good ideas and to crowdsource things that might not necessarily be on our agenda yet, which are useful to think about. So I think I wouldn't dissuade you submitting comments on that particular topic.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, so anyone can put in broad comments if they wish, Owen, and I guess you'll pick up on those as appropriate as you receive them then. Yeah. Okay, does anyone else have any questions for Owen and Udbhav currently based on the question? I see John Carr as opposed to Todd. Let's put a comment in the chat. Yeah, I think there was a link to this in some of the commentary that Mozilla provided, Owen and Udbhav, in terms of impact on parental controls or filtering in sensitive locations like schools, etc.
Yeah, I can maybe speak to this a little bit, because obviously we've been experiencing many of these issues in our US rollout, and we had to work with continue to work with a lot of different groups who were involved in various ways in which the DNS is used for certain topics. And so we had quite a good collaboration with ISPs in the US, and we managed to address many of the issues around, for instance, opt-in filtering or enterprise solutions for DNS. And so obviously we continue to monitor how those things are working, but like trying to get to a good solution on those aspects is something which is like very much an ongoing project for us.
So you're thinking of the canary domain in that context? Right?
Yes, the canary domain is the solution we deployed in the US, and it appears, I don't have the precise numbers or the precise insight to hand, but it's been something which has been over time has been developing in an iterative way, and I think working relatively well.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, any questions? I see Udbhav has put some further comments in the chat.
Yeah, I have a quick question, Andrew.
Sure.
It's Brett here. One of the, I believe, if I remember rightly, one of the stipulations from Mozilla is if filtering is done, then the list of domains that are filtered must be published. Do you think that situation will is likely to change or be open for negotiation or something?
Yeah, I think with the kind of the policy around publishing of domains. Now, obviously, for filtering, I guess what we're trying to do in that context is ultimately to ensure that there is sufficient transparency and accountability around blocking. And in some aspects, in some senses, kind of the publishing of lists can be an effective means of transparency in other domains. So, for instance, when it comes to, say, child protection, it's not the most effective way. So I think that what we are actually looking for, and I think there is a question to this effect in the comment period document, is can we we're very interested in folks who can give us suggestions on how we can find that kind of accountability for when the blocking is taking place through the DNS, but in a way which is more effective than the publishing of blocking distance in certain instances.
Okay, thank you. That's good to hear.
Good. Thank you. Right. Any?
Yeah, I've got one.
Yeah.
Andrew. So you mentioned that you're looking to get feedback from all kinds of stakeholders. Given that there are not many working days between now and the 4th of January, is there any possibility of extending that date a little?
That's something that we'll have to think about internally. Now, obviously, we're not purposely trying to keep this short to avoid feedback. Just the reason why it's obviously the timing is not necessarily ideal for end of year holidays. So it is something that we'll look into. And if we've done quite a bit of outreach so far, and it seems like folks who are interested in this debate seem to be okay with the time frame. But it's something that we'll make a purpose of one of checking in to make sure that if there is feedback that is useful, and that if folks need another day or two or another week or so, that good feedback doesn't go by the wayside for that reason.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, last chance for any questions for Owen and Udbhav. Silence as not. In which case, fantastic. Thank you both for coming on to take any questions. I'm sure that was useful, and will hopefully encourage some more people to go on to the consultation and actually complete it. It's not complex, in all fairness. So, and is written in English, which is marvelous in this particular area, to see straightforward questions being asked. So I'm sure that will prove worthwhile. So thank you. And you're both welcome to stay on, by the way, if you wish.
Well, I have a call at the half hour. I think Udbhav does as well. So this is good timing for us to hop off.
Fantastic. Okay, in that case, thanks both for making the time today.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Right. So hopefully that was useful for everyone, and we will now switch seamlessly from there to DNS privacy and also sort of BCP type matters with Sara. So Sara, do you want to see if you can indeed share? That's worked perfectly.
Excellent. And can you hear me okay as well?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah. So the two topics I'm going to cover today are an update on a newly developed client desktop app for DNS privacy, and I'll also talk about the recently published BCP for recursive operators. So the first part is really focusing on a GUI that's been developed for Stubby, which is a client which has been around for quite a while, but has been mainly command line. So we've been developing that. And then secondly, just a couple of months ago, a RFC 8932, the recommendations for DNS privacy operators, was published by the IETF, and I'll walk through the details of that. So to start with the desktop GUI client, some of you may be familiar with Stubby. It's been around a while, as I said. It's essentially a wrapper around the GetDNS library, and it operates as a daemon, and it will listen on localhost. So if you update your system settings, it will capture your DNS queries, and it's effectively a smart proxy. It has full support for DOT, DOE support is on the way. But one of the things that we've done with GetDNS is we've tried to keep it very fully featured in terms of the standardized attributes that you can use for privacy. So it has padding, it will do keep alive to keep persistent connections open, it handles out of order responses, you can authenticate with a name or with pins, etc. So all that functionality is in there. And because it's based on GetDNS, it also potentially has the capability to do full native stub validation. So that's something we plan to exploit in future. One thing I just want to say about where Stubby comes from, it was originally developed by quite a various team of people, These days, it gets a lot of funding through the DNS privacy.org organisation, and in practice, the main implementers are Sinodun folks and also the NL NetLab folks, although we do have contributions from other people. But we're essentially DNS implementers. We're not tied to any specific recursive resolver. So one of our goals with this was very much to produce a tool that allowed users to take command and to use their own choices for resolver as they wanted to, and to try and give them the knowledge to do that. We started out with a very basic GUI prototype back in 2018. That was our MacOS. But obviously what we recognise is in most of the world, most people use Windows. And so we started looking at a project to port that GUI and really evolve it onto Windows. And this work really predates the announcement that Microsoft made that they would do native DOS support in Windows. And when we started looking at this, there were no other GUI-based applications on Windows that would let you encrypt your DNS for the whole system. And even now there are relatively few, and apart from the Microsoft work, they tend to tie you into a particular operator. So we think there's value in this, and we think it complements the native support for DO. And one of the things we wanted to look at was design questions around usable security, because it's still a novel idea to expose users to the fact that they need to encrypt their DNS and what it all actually means, and that they might have to make choices in doing that. So until we have auto discovery mechanisms and auto upgrade, we see this as a useful tool to empower users to make their own choices. So there were basically two big chunks of work that we had to do to achieve this, and the bulk of the work was funded by the Comcast Innovation Fund to the DNS Privacy Organisation, and we're hugely, hugely grateful for that. Historically, GetDNS had been very focused on Linux, so we spent some time updating the infrastructure for it. We migrated it to use CMake. You can now build it natively in Visual Studio and Windows. We've had it added to one of the very widely used Windows package managers. So one of the side effects of this work is that it should make it very straightforward for Windows developers to use GetDNS in their own applications if they want to encrypt DNS since at the moment there's no way that I'm aware of to hook into a Windows API to use system DNS integration, DNS encryption, sorry. And we also created Stubby as a fully fledged Windows service, which makes it nice and robust. So once we've got all the groundwork in place, we separately developed the GUI. For various reasons, we chose to build it in Qt. It runs as a manager, separately managing the underlying Windows service. And one of the balances we wanted to hit with the UI was to target both non-technical users who just want a big button to press, but also to have enough functionality that it was useful to technical users as well who want to go and make their own choices. And we've done it with a native Windows theme at the moment. So it can look slightly grating if you're not used to Windows, but we think that's the right way to go with it. So I'll just walk you through a few screenshots very quickly of what the latest release looks like. So the landing page looks like this. We wanted to present users initially with a lot of information so that they could read through it and get basic knowledge of what this app is actually doing before they proceed. And we also try and provide links at the bottom to information where they can go and find out more if they want to, excuse me. So on first arrival, they have all this information, but if they want a slightly cleaner interface, there's a checkbox and they can hide some of those details. At the top, we have a single button. So for non-technical users, the idea would be, it would be a little like a VPN. You come in and you don't worry about the settings. If you're happy to accept the defaults, you can just hit the button and the system will start running and you're pretty much done. What we do is show details of the profile that they're using, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide. But we also try and show them their active networks, just so that they have a bit of visibility of that. On the Network Profiles tab, this is where the users can do a bit more configuration if they want to. What we're shipping in the first release is 3 built-in profiles. The first one is, we've used the name Untrusted because we want this to be sort of a default profile you would use if you didn't want to use the network resolvers and you wanted to go to a third-party resolver of your choice. This would use strict dot and it would go to the user configured resolvers. The choice of which resolvers will be the default here is an ongoing question. Stubby historically is shipped with those servers that the Stubby developers have maintained, but we're fully reviewing what we will do as the first pass here. We also have a trusted profile, and the idea there will be that the user can opt to use the network resolvers and do dot opportunistically to them if they support it. And we have a third profile, which is where we'll add DO support when it's available. The idea being that can be used in networks that might be blocking 853. You can choose which one of these profiles is your default. That's on the next tab. We expose a handful of options here. GetDNS supports a lot more, but we're trying not to overload the user. So we just have a few options here, like choosing to encrypt traffic, always authenticate it, round robin's a performance option, etc. We also in the table have links that go directly to the privacy statement provided by the operator of the resolvers. So the goal here is that users who want to be more informed can click on these links and directly go and see statements about the organizations that are running the resolvers to help themselves make choices. And this will tie into my later discussion of the best practices, where we have a recommended format for what this privacy statement could look like. We also, obviously, if a user wants to change a server or edit it, they can put their own settings in, they can fix problems, etc. On the network tabs, we display all the currently active networks, and we've split them into wired networks and wireless networks. So say I just joined a wireless network, it would suddenly appear here. The active ones are shown in green. If joining a network, you can, in this tab, you can choose to override the default profile for any network and hard code it. And if then, as you move around and join a network, if it's the case that this would change the profile you use, Stubby will detect this and automatically restarts and give you a little pop-up saying, by the way, you've just switched to this profile. And if you join a completely new network, it will give you a pop-up saying, you've joined a new network and it's currently using your default. You can go and fix that up if you want to. And if you're on multiple networks with mixed profiles, we always use the most conservative profile here. And lastly, we have a utilities page, which is really for troubleshooting or more advanced users. If you actually want to go and look at the logs coming out of the manager to see what it's doing, if you need to restart it. We do periodic probes to try and pick up when there are problems with the connections to your current servers, and so a few diagnostics here. We've just done an alpha release of it. I've sent these slides to Andrew and hopefully he can share them on the list. So these are links that you can follow to have a look at this. The installer and the documentation is on the DNS privacy website. The code is on GitHub. All the actual GetDNS and Stubby code is also on GitHub. We're very close to a beta release, so that should be happening in January. And that's the point at which we think we would encourage users to start playing with this. But in the meantime, feedback is very much welcome. We, as you can imagine, have a long list of features we would like to add to this. Probably top of the pile is a probe mode for servers. If you get the slides and you follow the link underlined there, you'll go to a page on dnsprivacy.org where we have a big matrix monitoring most of the common resolvers in terms of availability and which of the set of privacy features they support. Now, obviously, that monitoring is happening from a single location. What we'd like to do is add to the GUI the ability for the user to run that set of probes from their vantage point so that it can help them authenticate, it can help them validate what services are saying about what they do, how they run their encrypted DNS, and also help them make choices about which might be the best one for them. We'd also like to add the option for a custom profile and obviously expert mode to dig down into the configuration. As a selfish feature, I would also like macOS support because I'm a Mac user. I've been desperately trying to keep it working on macOS. It's not there at the moment, but that's one of the things that I will be certainly working on. So this is very much a work in progress. If people are interested in testing out the beta, in contributing code, or just giving us general feedback on usability, we would very much appreciate all and any of that. If people have questions on this, please jump in now, or I'll move on for now to the second part of the talk, and then I can take them all at the end if there's nothing urgent right now. I can't see the chat, by the way, so
there's nothing on the chat at the moment, so it's
I shall just plow on regardless in that case. Right, so turning to the second topic, there's recently been published a best current practices for DNS privacy operators. Now, this document was published through the IETF, and it's labeled as an IETF BCP. And what that means, what you might well be familiar with, is that the IETF produces RFCs, but they also have an additional category they can add to a standards track RFC, which labels it as a BCP, a best current practice. And the most recent of those, while they're almost up to 9,000 in terms of the number of RFCs they've published, there's only 230 or so BCPs that are a subset of that number of RFCs. This particular document we started back in July 2018, and a lot of the groundwork was actually funded by the Open Technology Fund because they saw the value in increasing the transparency of how encrypted services were operated. And it was finally published in October of this year. So the document covers two main core principles. The first one is that it enumerates operational, policy and security considerations for operators of DNS recursive resolvers who choose to offer privacy services. And privacy services is our catch-all term here for DOT or DO or a combination of. And it could incorporate other things like quick in future. The second part of the document is that it also provides a framework for operators of servers to write something called an RPS, a recursive operator privacy statement. The idea for this was inspired by RFC 6841, which allowed authoritative operators to publish their policies and practice for how they do DNSSEC. And we thought there'd be value in having an equivalent document for recursives so that things were nicely consistent. So in the first part of the document, where we talk about the different things that you need to consider as a recursive operator, we split the areas of consideration up into three. And within each of these three areas, we list the different considerations, and for each one, we describe the threats associated with it. And mostly this is focused on the threats to the end users of the service and how the operator can minimize those threats. And we list three actions the operator can take. The first one is mitigations. And really the consideration is that if you're running a DNS privacy service, you really should be doing all the mitigations listed in this document. So we say to be compliant with the BCP, you must enact all the mitigations. You can additionally choose to offer what we've classified here as optimizations and additional options, but they're really the bells and whistles to the core principles around running the service, which are the mitigations. The three areas have been split up as follows. Firstly, we consider what happens on the wire between the client and the server. So here we're talking about the nitty-gritty protocol details of the do and dot, various attributes there. We talk about how certificates can be managed. We talk about publishing authentication credentials. We talk about how operators should provide the same options and availability on their encrypted services as they do on their unencrypted services. We talk about some of the nuances of using proxies, etc. So we're trying to cover things that you actually need to know to operate the name server. In the second area, we look at handling any data that you may maintain as an operator on the server. So that's data handling and minimization, only allowing people who need to access the data, keeping the minimum amount of data that you need. And we also have a discussion here about anonymization and pseudo-anonymization and how this can be done. And one of the big issues that became clear when we were trying to write this is that there are no standard anonymization techniques today that are free of patents that can be widely used in general situations. So what we actually do in an appendix in this document is we try and do a survey of all the useful tools that are out there. And I think the table is 8 or 9, and we try and categorize them by what they do. We look at their history. So we're trying to help operators work out the best tool for them, because we don't have a single one-size-fits-all solution here. And lastly, we talk about data that is sent onwards from the server. So we cover two things here. One is the protocol aspects of a recursive to authoritative path. So by that, we mean things like QNAME minimization, ECS, things like that. And the second part is if and how an operator may share data with third parties. So we try and cover things like valid use cases shown for research, for example. So there's some guidance on that. So those are all the considerations that we talk about. And then we move on to how would you document as an operator what you do? And that's where the recursive operator privacy statement comes in. Now, the driver here was that as part of this original work, one thing the Open Technology Fund work involved was trying to generate a comparison of the current privacy statements by the bigger operators. So a colleague and I sat down one day and we tried to wade through everything that there is from some of the major operators at the time. Our goal was to produce a table like this. Apologies if it's small. Hopefully you'll see it in more detail on the slides later. But basically what we did was we looked at Quad9, Cloudflare, Google and OpenDNS, and we tried to wade through their policies and pick out, do they log IP addresses? Do they share data? Who are their partners? Who are they getting funding from? Do they do NX redirection? Do they block domains? Do they do DNSSEC? You know, so look at this full matrix of things. And it took two of us, I'll say relatively competent technical people, almost a full day just to extract this information. We thought, well, non-technical users or moderately technical users are really stuck trying to extract this information. So our driver here was to stop them having to wade through statements in different style. With some of them have very different language depending on the legal jurisdiction that they're written in. They could be pages in length. They could be split over multiple web pages. We wanted to produce something that we could hopefully persuade all operators to write, and it would have a consistent format and comparable content. And in the document, we also provide an example RPS, which covers everything you saw in that table. And that example has less than 1,000 words. So if you format that into 80 characters wide, that's 100 lines of text that should tell you everything you need to know about what an operator does. To quickly run over the content of that RPS, it's split into two sections. Firstly, policy, and secondly, practice. In the policy part, we firstly just require a clear statement that the operator considers IP addresses as personally identifiable information and that they will treat it as such. We ask them to make statements about any data sharing that they do, any exceptions to that data sharing policy, we use the term associated entities. So we want this to be a catch-all for partners, funding sources, etc. So, you know, this is just about a transparency declaration of who else is involved in running the service. A statement about whether or not they will correlate data with any other services that they run. And we ask for a statement about filtering. So what we don't do here is prescribe any constraints on filtering, but we do ask for transparency to the extent of publishing a policy as opposed to the literal list of names. But so we just want users to be able to understand the overall policy here. In practice, we have a placeholder in case they have any deviations for any reason. We have a section where they want them to enumerate precisely what they do offer, so it's clear which protocols, which versions of TLS, all the nitty-gritty of the protocol. Similarly, for the upstream capabilities, make a clear statement about what you do, provide a support contact, and 5 is really about a link to any legalese you might have about data processing you do because of your jurisdiction. It wasn't appropriate in an IETF document to put anything more than that here. So we're just encouraging operators to link to something, another document that can hold those details. So this has come out very recently as a BCP. I'm not aware of any major operator who has published one yet. We do like to think that operators who can write one and can demonstrate compliance with this will do themselves a lot of good in terms of attracting users. And it's an interesting thought to see how this might interplay with Mozilla's TRR program if they made, for example, one of their requirements that TRR operators produced one of these documents and were minimally compliant, although the requirement to do DNSSEC might cause issues there, because as far as I know, Mozilla don't recognize that. However, if anybody is interested in developing one, I would be more than happy to help out, or if you know of anybody who's interested, please let me know. And the last thing to say is that although this is technically published as a RFC through the IETF, it is not an immutable document. We do have the opportunity to update it if we get enough feedback, and I fully expect that to happen actually over the next couple of years as we get practical input, more practical input than from operators as more people operate these services. Unfortunately, IETF doesn't have the concept of a living document. They're thinking about it, and it'd be lovely if they did. This, for me, would fall absolutely into that category if the opportunity arose. So if you're an operator and you look at this and you have genuine feedback about it, please do get in touch with myself or one of the other authors of the document, and we'll consider revising it. So that's the end of my time. I think we do have a little time for questions.
Yep, we do. So thank you, Sara. So two separate but to an extent related subjects, both covering sort of different elements. So does that throw up any questions, or anyone have any comments on either of those two topics that you would wish to share? I think Chris will take just
yes. Yeah, I've got a question. So yeah, you say no major operators have published an RPS, but has anybody smaller done that? I was trying to look on dnsprivacy.org to see if there was a list, but I couldn't see it.
So as of today, because this is such a recent publication, the Stubby servers are the only ones that have actually published an RPS, and there is a link in there, but that's it. But it's because with an RFC, it tends to be one of those things that people won't enact it until it's actually published. So what we're doing now is we're trying to do outreach to people to encourage them to convert whatever they do have into an RPS. But obviously, if a couple of the larger players actually led the way and took the initiative in publishing it, we think that that would be a very good thing.
Yes. So would you expect that, over time there would be a growing list of these? Yeah. Or because it kind of, obviously it's good to do, but it's a question of who are going to look at those and who's going to make the decisions. I guess it's up to the end users to look those up and make their own choices, isn't it?
It is. One thing we had initially been hopeful of, and it's a bit sad the Mozilla folks aren't around, is that they would be more invested in this, given that it's an IETF standard, and that they might be willing to use this as the basis of their TRR program. Fairly early on, it became clear that they were following their own policy process, and I can understand the reasons for that. I mean, what we're seeing, that while they led the way, what we're seeing now is that there are other people also trying to generate sets of resolvers that they consider trusted. So the Chrome team and Microsoft are, and other browsers are. And one of the hopes was that if we had this standard, people could use this as a basis, even if they themselves used slight deviations from it. It was a good starting point that could be used for some of these services. So again, now that it's actually an RFC, we're hoping to see a bit of take up on that. And I think that would be the key thing that would raise awareness of it and push it forward.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
And it is worth just reinforcing what you said earlier, Sarah, that this did only come out, 6 weeks or so ago. So it will take a little while for people to catch up, I suspect. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Chris. Anyone else with any comments or questions on either this or the Stubby GUI presentation? Or is this something you want to perhaps take away and have a think about, perhaps? Have you had much response, by the way, Sarah, since the RFC actually came out? Have you had many people coming back with feedback?
Not on that version, because I think the feeling was by the time we made quite a few updates just before publication. So the feeling was that we've done as much as we can to capture a good snapshot in this version of the document. So I would expect, I can imagine maybe middle of next year, we would certainly start talking to operators again. And at that point say, what do you think? Should we be looking to do a biz of this document now, or do you actually think it's in reasonable shape to stand as it is? And we're also going to do some outreach into RIPE. RIPE also have a BCP working group. So we're going to, and they were sort of involved in the very early days of this, but we eventually took it to IETF for better or for worse in terms of it being a living document. So we might well find that RIPE might want to do some supplementary comments on this, just because their process is lighter weight.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, thank you. Right, last chance. Anyone with any comments or questions to jump on? See lots of thoughtful faces on my gallery at the moment, so fantastic. Well, look, I'm sure people will come back with some thoughts once they've had a chance to properly absorb the document. So thank you, Sarah, for covering both of those topics. I think the clients are also quite interesting. It's good to see something out there, especially bear in mind, even though Windows does have support of sorts for DOE, of course, it's still within the Windows Insider program. So you're ahead of the game on that, in actually having something out there that is potentially usable by an end user, as opposed to a sort of a tech expert, which is, I think, groundbreaking and to be encouraged. So thank you for that. And as Sara mentioned, I will share the slides with the notes, which will give you a chance to look at that table, for example, which I think will be quite informative to just do a compare and contrast with the various documents. Right, thank you. Right, we have in the brief remaining couple of minutes, does anyone have anything else that they would like to raise on the call this week? So chance under any other business, if there's anything you wish to bring up. And perhaps whilst Chris is there, just putting you on the spot, noting that Glenn was keen to see some stuff being put up for calls for adoption from the ADD working group. I was curious whether you thought, given the absence of too much feedback on the equivalence definition, whether the requirements document, perhaps it was worth posing the question to the list, whether it should be considered for adoption by the working group.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm brave enough yet. We were of course discussing the concept of, you know, what is an equivalent resolver. You know, what is it? If you know about a DOE 53 resolver, and you want to know what is the DOT or DOH resolver that does the same thing, but you can talk to more securely. So I got a statement of how that I think works. That a definition of what is equivalent, but then it turns out maybe we also need a definition of something else that is not quite equivalent, but to allow for designation of a resolver that essentially does the same thing but happens to be operated by someone else. Which is, yes, I can see in some circumstances that's useful, but it is also not identical to equivalence, is it? Because if you're talking to a different entity, then that entity may have different policies and may be under different legal rules. So it's not necessarily guaranteed to be the same. So it's a question of how do we talk about that in the draft.
Yeah, so maybe a little bit more work required just yet before that's ready for prime time then.
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, thank you, Chris. Right. Anything from anyone else before we conclude the call today? Can't see any hands.
It's Neil here. I just wanted to say thank you very much for the invite, and I look forward to maybe attending again and maybe get involved as we move forward. But thank you for the invite.
You're very welcome, and I hope you're enjoying your time with Nominet. So fantastic. Thanks for coming on. Brilliant. Right. Well, with that positive note, let's draw the call to a close today. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming on. Particular thanks to Sara, and in their absence to Owen and Udbhav from Mozilla. And have a great week, everyone. Thanks, all.
Bye, everyone.